Grace and peace, Apostle Cheryl Richardson here with Judas Roar Domestic Violence Awareness Initiative. We're so excited that you've taken time to hang out with us on today. Listen, today's topic is going to be 5 steps to dismantling thinking errors. 5 steps to dismantling thinking errors. Now, in a previous video, we talked about how abusers often will use the thinking errors of the people around them to determine and identify who their victim will be, who is a viable victim. So today we're going to talk about dismantling those thinking errors. Now, don't forget to subscribe if you have not done so already. Take a few seconds, check down here for that subscribe button, click that button, make sure you tap that bell for notifications, and you will be notified each time we upload a new weekly video. I'm going to give you a few seconds to take care of that, and then we'll get right to it. And we're back. Okay, so in a previous video, we discussed cognitive distortions, also known as thinking errors, and also known as stinking thinking. What is a cognitive distortion? It is a repetitive cycle of unhealthy thought process that can be a catalyst for mental illness. It's not the same thing as simply feeling badly because something didn't go well or didn't go as expected in our lives. It is repetitive, it is cyclical, it is negative self-talk, and it is inaccurate. Inaccurate, okay? And so it typically occurs when we have a negative experience and we're struggling with how to manage what we've just experienced in our life. They can serve as a catalyst for mental illness, such as depression, anxiety, and self-defeating behaviors. Now, previously, we discussed the fact that often abusers will look for those who engage in cognitive distortions or thinking errors or stinking thinking in order to target them as victims. Okay, so today we're talking about 5 steps to dismantling thinking errors. 5 steps to dismantling thinking errors. Why is this important? What has this got to do with domestic violence or toxic relationships? As I said previously, a thinking error or cognitive distortion or stinking thinking is a very negative, cyclical, self-denigrating, self-deprecating way of thought. It establishes a pattern of negative internal self-talk. Now, the problem is this, the challenge is this, that when we engage in and incorporate thinking errors in the way we function and move through life and navigate life, it makes us incredibly vulnerable to those who don't have your or my best interest at heart. It makes us vulnerable to those who are looking for someone to exploit. And it makes us vulnerable to those who have abusive behaviors, abusive tendencies in relationships, because it allows them to target you or I as someone that can be easily manipulated and easily controlled. Now, previously we identified 10 thinking errors, also known as cognitive distortions, also known as stinking thinking. And I want to list those for you now. But if you want a more in-depth description of what these thinking errors are and how they manifest in our lives, then please check here on the channel and look for the video that is entitled Thinking Errors That Abusers Look For. 10 thinking errors that abusers look for to identify their target. Okay, so if you check that video out, you'll get a more detailed description of what each thinking error is. But here they are, listed in no particular order, okay? Thinking error number 1 is polarized thinking, also known as black and white thinking. There is no gray area when someone is engaging using this thinking error, has incorporated this thinking error into the way they function in life. It's a very rigid thought process. It is very unforgiving. There's no gray area. It's either this or that. It's either right or wrong. Okay, so that's thinking error number one. Thinking error number two is overgeneralization. Overgeneralization. Thinking error number three is catastrophizing. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's catastrophizing. Okay? Thinking error number four is personalization. Personalization. And that means taking things personally when they had nothing to do with you, assuming responsibility for negative events that were beyond your control or that you had nothing to do with at all. Okay, thinking error number five is mind reading. Mind reading, assuming that we know what someone is thinking when they've not shared their thoughts with us. Okay, thinking error number six is mental filtering. Thinking error number seven is discounting the positives. Now, these two may sound like they're the same thinking error, but there's a very important difference there. Okay, discounting the positives is number seven. Number eight are should statements. SHOULD statements. Should statements. People who operate in this one tend to use must have, should have, oughta, woulda, coulda. Okay, and those are should statements. Number nine is emotional reasoning. Number nine is emotional reasoning, and number 10 is labeling. All right, let's take a couple of minutes and look at some definitions that are pertinent to our topic on today. So we're talking about dismantling thinking errors or cognitive distortions or stinking thinking. And it's important that we understand that in order to combat, in order to manage a cognitive distortion, it's not good enough to simply say to yourself, well, that's not true, because you won't believe it. You won't believe that it's true because you've already arrived at the conclusion that the cognitive distortion applies to you, that the thinking error describes you, right? And remember now, thinking distortions are inaccurate. It's important to remember that they're not accurate. So you have to dismantle it, not just deny its validity. It's important that you take it apart. So let's look at some definitions. When you're talking about dismantling something, you're talking about taking it apart, taking it to pieces, right? Breaking it down to its lowest common denominators, taking it apart and examining every piece of it. And so what we're talking about is restructuring our thought process, right? We're not simply going to say, well, that's not true, because we won't believe that. We won't accept the negative thought. It's too ingrained if it's a cognitive distortion. It's something that we rely on as a normal part of processing our life experiences. Okay, so we're talking about dismantling. We're talking about restructuring. A synonym, or words that mean the same thing as restructuring, are revamp, okay, and some others are reconstruct, reshuffle, and my favorite, reorient. Reorient. Change the way that we're looking at a thing. View it from a different angle. View all of the small pieces that come together that form that thought process in the first place. I am a firm believer, and I know from personal experience, that it matters how we define a thing. It matters how we define a thing because it lets us know how empowered we are to address it or to change it or to improve upon it. So you want to make sure that whatever definition that you're working with is accurate. And in an instance of domestic violence, not a definition that your abuser has given you for who you are or what you are or how much value you have, okay? And so we're talking about restructuring how we think and how we process information and how we view ourselves. So to restructure by definition means to change, alter, or restore the structure of a thing. It means to affect a fundamental change. And that's what we're talking about. This is why it's not enough to just simply say, well, that's not true. when you identify a thinking error. It's important that you dismantle it, that you take it apart, that you break it down so that you don't have any second thoughts about how you're viewing it, how you've restructured it, right? And how you are choosing to process it. Remember now, cognitive distortions are inaccurate. They are negative and they are cyclical in nature, okay? So you want to affect a fundamental change in the way that you process a negative experience, okay? And this means moving beyond the superficial and getting to the root of the negative self talk, getting to the root of it, getting to the bottom of it. All right, let's identify the 5 steps to dismantling a thinking error. Step number 1 is calm down. Calm down. Chill. Breathe. Okay? Stop. Just stop. Calm down. Calm yourself down. Okay? That's step number 1. Step number 2 is to identify what thinking error or thinking errors, what stinking thinking, what cognitive distortions are you utilizing? Are you engaging in? So you calm down, which is step number 1. And this will help you to identify what pattern you are stuck in. Okay, now you may need to review the list of cognitive distortions and their accompanying definitions. So check out that video that I mentioned previously, 10 thinking errors that abusers look for to target their victim. And this will help you to identify which one or which ones you tend to engage in, indulge in. Okay, so identify those. And you want to be prepared to question your faulty pattern. So once you identify it, don't succumb to it. Once you identify it, challenge it, challenge them. And we're going to talk about how you can do that in step 3. So step number 3 is self-monitoring, okay? What are you saying to yourself exactly? It may be helpful for you to write it down. But step number 3 is self-monitoring. What is it that you are saying to yourself? What is occurring when you say these things? What type of event, what individual, what setting, what circumstances triggers this particular cognitive distortion or thinking error that you are engaging in? All right. What are the circumstances? There are some commonalities, I guarantee it. Do you have these thoughts under certain circumstances, only involving certain individuals? Okay, so you may have to monitor yourself for a little bit in order to identify what the pattern is, as well as what the cognitive distortions are that you are engaging in. Okay, and then step number 4 is to gather evidence. Okay, what do I mean by that? What is the evidence, the specific evidence that supports your thinking error? What is the evidence that proves, adds validity to your thinking error? And what is the evidence that refutes it? What is the evidence that refutes it? Okay, now, literally write this information down. Write it down. Write it down. And it will help you to identify what the thinking error is that you're engaging in and what time of day, what individual, what set of circumstances, and what thought process does this set of circumstances trigger in you. I guarantee you there's a pattern. And I guarantee you there's a connection between the who, the what, the where, the why, and the thinking error that you have enlisted in order to help you to navigate what you perceive is a negative situation. Okay? All right? What is your modus operandi? Under what circumstances do you engage whatever thinking errors that you struggle with? So we've talked about steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. Number 1, calm down, chill, breathe, calm down. If you're upset, you're not going to be able to do this. Step number 2, identify what thinking error or what thinking errors, if there's more than one, that you tend to engage in. And then step number 3 is to monitor yourself. Identify what circumstances, what conditions tend to exist when you go there to this negative place in your head. And then step number 4 is to gather evidence. Okay, what is the evidence that you can identify that supports that your thinking error or your cognitive distortion is accurate? That is accurate. That is a fact. That is the truth. Okay, and then, in the interest of fairness, identify what evidence exists to refute it that indicates that it is inaccurate, that it is not correct. Okay, so we've talked about steps 1 through 4. Step number 5 to dismantling thinking errors is a cost-benefit analysis. A cost-benefit analysis. What do you get out of embracing the negative self-talk? What do you gain from that? Does it confirm something that you essentially believe about yourself anyway? What is it that you get from it? Because all behavior is geared toward meeting a need that we have on some level. And oftentimes this is completely subconscious. It's not a conscious thing. So what do you get out of it? And then what has your thought process cost you? Really? Well, what do you mean cost? Well, what about relationships? What about your relationships with those who do love you and who have been a support system to you? Does your negative self-talk, does your embracing of your cognitive distortion, your thinking error, does your pattern of thinking, do they find it off-putting? Do you find that your support system is withdrawing from you? They're interacting with you less frequently. They're not having conversations with you as in-depth as they have in the past. Okay, so what is it costing you in terms of your relationships with those who are supportive of you? And what impact is your thought process having on your physical, emotional, and psychological health and wellness? What impact is it having on your spiritual wellness? What is your mood like overall? Because engaging in cognitive distortions, functioning that way, as we said before, it's repetitive, it's cyclical, it's denigrating, it's self-deprecating. There's nothing uplifting or edifying about a cognitive distortion. And so over time, it becomes exhausting. It becomes exhausting to the one who is utilizing them, and it becomes exhausting to those who care about them. Okay? Ask yourself this: what is the worst that can happen? And how can I respond if the worst does happen? Now, I'm a military veteran, and what I learned during my time in there, certainly as a commander, is to prepare for your most stringent tasking. So, if the very worst that you imagine happens, how would you respond to that? Are you equipped to respond to it? All right. Now, is your thinking error, your assumption, your negative assumption about yourself, is it thought-based or is it emotion-based? And this is why I mentioned your mood. Is it based on your mood? Are you making the mistake of assigning your emotion, deciding that your emotion is the truth, as opposed to your emotion being your response to what you perceive as truth in that moment? Okay, so there's a difference there. Okay, what other ways are there for the incident or the evidence to be interpreted? Can it only be viewed the way that you're viewing it when you're engaging in your thinking error? Or are you able to consider other options for interpreting it. Okay? Is it really black and white, or are there some gray areas? So step number 5 is that you should do a cost benefit analysis. What are you gaining? Okay? What are you preventing? How's it benefiting you to utilize these thinking errors? And then what is it costing you? What is it costing you in terms of relationships? What is it costing you in terms of your support system? What is it costing you in terms of peace of mind? What is it costing you psychologically, emotionally, physically, even? What is it costing you really? We have been talking about the 5 steps to dismantling thinking errors. Now, the purpose of the 5 steps is to reduce and dismantle stress-inducing thinking errors and to replace them, revamp them, reorient ourselves, restructure, okay, them into something that is more accurate and less rigid. Okay, so what we're striving for here is accuracy. We have defined what it means to restructure. We have talked about what the 10 thinking errors are. We have reviewed the 5 steps to dismantling a thinking error. And so it is our prayer that this video is beneficial to you, that it is helpful to you. All right, now, you can make sure that you check down here below in the description box for some other ways that you can support us. We appreciate your prayers. We are committed to raising awareness about domestic violence in all of its ugliness and empowering victims and survivors and even thrivers to move forward with their life and to walk out their purpose and to walk out their destiny. This is Apostle Cheryl Richardson with Judah's Roar Domestic Violence Awareness Initiative. Thank you for taking time to hang out with us on today. Be sure to subscribe and share. Visit this channel as often as you like and share as many videos as you would like. Blessings to you.